All right. Hello, Dr. Thompson.
Hello, Dr. Ogle. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, really
Okay.
good.
All right. So we are starting a thing together because I think you and I both have really interesting perspectives on a topic that is usually talked about from a bro science perspective and not actual science. And so we want to, I think that we both have a shared value of taking the science that we know and making it understandable to the public. And how can we use that information that we know to help other people?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think right now I think it's an inflection point right now in society because the laws and everything and the regulations as it pertains to cannabis specifically are changing, and that's sort of rippling out into so many different orbits of the world, and it's affecting so many things. And I think where we come together is in sports and physiology. And because both of our backgrounds really come from studying athletes and high performers and people that are really trying to get the most out of their body, which seems so counterintuitive to people that typically think about cannabis. They think, well, how could those two things possibly go together? But when you understand physiology, when you understand the endocannabinoid system and how those things could potentially work together, it makes perfect sense. So I really hope that together we can help people understand how, high performers can really incorporate things like this carefully with intention and have good results, sort of like you would a supplement or nutritional training or, even training principles in general.
hmm Exactly. And I realized I didn't even say what our topic is.
Okay. Oh yeah, right. The topic.
It's an exercise, cannabis and sport. And so yeah, tell me more about what was your educational background? What led you into this?
Yeah, for sure. So my undergraduate degree is in molecular biology and genetics. So I started out studying things at a very, very small level. And then my master's degree is actually in exercise physiology and applied physiology. So in Canada, in Ontario, kinesiologists are actually licensed healthcare providers. And so it's covered by insurance in Ontario if you get, so I was a registered kinesiologist working in clinical populations, but you can also work with athletes. Your designation covers, anything biomechanical, clinical, anything kinesiology related. So I worked in that for many, many years with athletes and in also a clinical population. And then fast forward to recently, I finished my PhD in pharmacy, and I focused a lot on, even in my physiology, I focused a lot on neurological problems, neurological degeneration, neurological problems that athletes would have or patients would have. And so I was starting to see, some of the pathways. Because I have a molecular undergrad, I would look a lot at molecular mechanisms to understand the physiology of how things were working. And so you're sort of looking to reverse engineer problems. And when you're working in clinical physiology, that's basically what you're doing. You're looking at a problem and you're trying to reverse it without drugs is your first approach. So I worked with a doctors group. And they were wonderful. Their whole aim was to get people to understand why they were taking certain drugs for chronic diseases, mostly. Some of them were post-op, and then how we could potentially help reduce the amount of drugs that they needed by incorporating physiology or training principles and things that they could do. So as I started to study that, that was when the endocannabinoid system sort of really started coming in, when I was looking more closely at the brain and concussion mechanisms. We dealt a lot with that. And so then when I went into my PhD, it was specifically to look at, because I saw a mechanism that I really thought you could use cannabinoid molecules to hit certain receptors to potentially reduce neuroinflammation. And so I didn't really want to go back to school. That was not on my bingo card, but I thought, if I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to do a PhD, it will be in something that truly, I am truly curious about, like, almost obsessively, you have to be obsessed with whatever you're studying. So obsessively looking at this pathway. And so applied and got accepted. And there was like nobody looking at this. And so I was really blessed to find my supervisor who, long story short, did accept me as a graduate student. And we've worked together now for many years, but he was a concussion specialist. And so his publications really look at the association between brain changes and heart mechanisms, and how when you have a concussion, it actually does change your heart EKG. So the electrophysiology, those two are very connected. And so he was a concussion specialist. So I was supervised by him, but I was double supervised. My other supervisor was the dean of pharmacy. And so she had been working in for many years with cannabinoid molecules, more clinically like epileptic pediatric patients. And, in Canada, cannabis is federally legal. So we're quite a bit ahead as far as looking at different, still very difficult there, but looking at different research, applications and things that you could potentially use it for clinically. So those two are who supervised me, and we just really got lucky. Right when I first started my PhD, the NFL put out a call, and they just randomly put out a call for research looking at cannabinoids or cannabis use in athletics. And so I sent it to my supervisor and was like, "Hey, check it out." Like they're putting up money for the exact thing that I wanted to study. So he gathered the most amazing group of people because he is truly a physiologist to every sense of the word. Like he knew you can't just look at one thing. You have to bring everybody to the table. So he picked pieces from every walk of life over the whole, many, many years and assembled this amazing team. And we did submit for the research funding. And I think there was over 110 research groups that submitted, and they did the NIH adjudication and stuff to pick the research team that they would fund. And we did, we were successful. So we've been working on that for the last 5 years. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love that obviously we come to this same topic, but from totally different backgrounds. Because I started out in exercise science, then I went straight to physical therapy school. So I was working with people through helping people through movement and less with you know, drugs or whatever. And so then I found a mentor and went back to school and ended up in a master's degree in exercise physiology. And it was like as soon as things turned cellular, my brain just like shut off and I just could not be interested in the cellular side of exercise. And that around that same time, I started going into or I started figuring out the field of motor learning and motor control. And so this is like again like another common thing where it's like okay, the neuro side of things.
Yeah.
And so I really liked that the way that the brain and the body talk to each other to be able to create movement and the potential of the human bodies. I really loved that area of science. And so I was studying pain and like people who've had multiple chronic ankle sprains, like people who sprain their ankles over and over again. And what is that about? It's basically like a change in the way that your brain is sending signals out to that part of the body. And so anyways, I was studying that and then I found this job at Humboldt and I'd always associated Humboldt with cannabis. Trying to find cannabis like wherever I've lived. Like I've lived in so many places where before weed was legal in Washington State, before it was legal in Colorado. I lived in both of those places before it was legal, and then I moved to Indiana, where again it was not legal. And so I thought, all right, I like it's all those little conversations that you'd have along the way with different people in the labs, like, oh, I wonder what would happen if we could get someone high and do a VO2 max test.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I then found this job at Humboldt and I was like, okay, maybe I can do some of that research that I've talked to. And I knew it was like around that time that I think Joe Rogan was really talking a lot about cannabis and like jujitsu, and I was like, I just know that there's something to this. People are talking about this more, and I just know that there's no science, or like there's the science there is like just so insufficient, and so I changed my entire field of research when I moved here and started looking at how people use cannabis with exercise and sport. And so that's how we ended up meeting. I don't remember even how we connected, but
No, I don't know either. It must have been yeah, I don't even remember. Yeah, I don't know. There's not many of us that look at it from this angle.
exactly. And so
Yeah.
I think like I started collecting other researchers and who are doing different types of cannabis and exercise research. And so like through that process, I've like met other people and it's been a really fun process of finding these other researchers and realizing that we all have such different angles into this that we're creating like a whole story. And so yeah, I'm really excited to hear more about the cellular side of things from you, to learn more from you. And I also want to acknowledge you had um the best dissertation that I've ever seen. It was like so complete. It's one of those things where as I was reading it, I was like angry that I didn't write it. It was like I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good. And yeah, I just wanted to yeah, I'm just really excited to talk to you more. And I knew that when I was sitting in on your dissertation defense, it was like I wish that this entire thing was recorded because the conversations we have and like the way the different things that we can talk about together is just really cool. And so I'm really happy that we're starting this so that we can continue to have these conversations and other people can hear it as well.
Yeah, I think that's the thing too, is to invite other people to listen to the conversations because they're happening, and I think just because of the stigma and everything that goes with cannabis, people try to keep their voices down and they don't say much because they're so worried about, like, even while I was in my PhD literally studying cannabis, I was still scared to say things because I'm like, I'm gonna get kicked out of school or I'm gonna get punished, or like, because it's such a polarizing topic. Yet in proper spaces where you're supposed to be proper and talk proper and, evidence-backed research and, we all this. Okay, well, we know that in academic spaces, but in the real world, athletes are using cannabis. We know this. Athletes are, and a lot of times, bro science or not, they are way ahead of people in research most times. Like creatine was in bodybuilders years, probably 10 or 15 years before research caught up, right? Blood flow restricted training. The bros are doing it, right? Like they are trying things and then the research will catch up. And I think cannabis is the same. Like they're not waiting for permission to use it and they're not waiting for guidelines. They are throwing things to the wall and see what sticks and they're figuring it out. And they've done a pretty good job up until now. I just think that the conversations are important for people to hear because it's a pretty aggressive commercial market right now and the laws are changing and it's allowing a lot of different products to be marketed, and that's just making it even more confusing for people to think like, well, what in the world is going on? Because if they wanted to try it for, something to be healthy, there are a lot of products out there now, legal, products that are, legally accessible under the Farm Bill, typically under the lane of hemp. Nobody's breaking any laws, but that doesn't mean that that's good for you, right? But there are things in this category of things that can be very beneficial depending on where you're coming from. So I think the conversations really are important for people to hear. And so they can't kick me out of school anymore because I graduated. So neither of us are going anywhere. Hopefully we don't get fired.
Yay! Okay, oh my gosh. Obviously we have so many different directions that we can go with this. And so tell me a little bit more about yeah, what you found or like what did you do for your dissertation? Yeah, what was your research there?
Yeah, so what I did, and it's actually just right now being reviewed because we're hoping to publish it. But thank you again for actually being part of that because it's such a long paper. Like it's so long that I felt horrible for anybody that had to be on my committee.
Though it was like it was just so it was just such a complete look at cannabis from all these different perspectives, from the historical side to the cellular side to then looking at athletes and like the athlete coach dynamic and athlete athletic trainer perspective. And so it was just all of these different ways that yeah, it was just
It,
so complete.
yeah, it did. It covered a lot. Like it took me a really long time to write, but to me, so what I studied really was I went into professional and elite level sports. So basically it was professionals and college level sports. So and what I did was I really wanted to understand the what is actually happening. So right now our NFL funding is for a clinical trial. So we're actually looking at physiological metrics of putting cannabinoids in contact sport athletes. We're doing a double blind crossover placebo, like some are taking it, some aren't, and we're going to compare a whole bunch of different metrics. And so that was the physiology part of it. But part of me was just sitting there and thinking, like, do we even really understand the landscape that we're speaking to when we're looking at this molecule and this demographic? Like, do we even know? What do they know? What do they think? How are they using it? What does that actually look like? Because that population is a very unique population, and there's a lot on the line, right? In professional sports, if we all saw Michael Phelps is a great example, like you can celebrate with alcohol, but and this guy's got how many Olympic medals? And the second cannabis enters in the sphere, well, now he loses all his sponsorships and stuff. And it's like, well, it's, that is just reality. It's crazy, but it's real. And so for me, I was like, well, we should probably really try to get a good understanding about what it actually looks like inside contact, high level contact sports when it comes to cannabis. What do they think? What do they know? How do they use it? What are they using? And so I went in and I did quantitative and qualitative studies. So I did survey information of athletes. So I had almost 170 professional and college level athletes answer these surveys. And then I also did interviews with them so that I could get some more. So we have the survey data, but then I really wanted to get deeper and have, you know, I wanted to hear their voices. I wanted to hear them talk about it so I could then take that data, write it up, and present it to the world because I want the world to hear the athletes from their perspective. People are putting words in their mouths all the time, but nobody has asked them, what do you think about this? How are you using this? How do you feel about how other people judge your use of this? Are you using it? And the data really speaks for itself. But I wasn't only interested in them, I was really also interested in their medical staff because within professional and collegiate level sports, that is a team, and the medical training staff's responsibility is the athletes. And so I wanted to know, as the people that are responsible for the health of these athletes, and sometimes in professional sports, that's $1 billion in your locker room. If you are responsible for these athletes, what do you know about this? What do you know if they wanted to have questions about cannabis use or how to use cannabinoids therapeutically, or what do you know about it? And secondly, would they even feel comfortable coming to you? And the answer is definitely not. Like the data spoke for itself. They were like, oh, hell no, I would hide this. Like I would take it to my grave. I'm not telling anybody. Right. And so again, get that. So I did the surveys and I had almost 70 medical staff that are working in professional or the NCAA or youth sports in Canada. So professional medical staff that are employed by the team. And that is a distinct job from a doctor that's just interested in sports. A doctor that's actually employed by a team's allegiance is to the team, and the players know that. And that changes the dynamic completely between the trust level of how that athlete perceives that doctor, because they know that that doctor reports to the club that pays their bills and gives them, playing time and yada, yada, right? So that it also looked at that. It looked at the dynamics between the athletes and the medical staff and the trust factor and different things involved there, and a lot of interesting things came up when it came to cannabis that actually could ripple out into a lot of different areas when you actually get into the crux of, well, these athletes were telling me that there's a lot of things that they would rather hide from their medical staff. And when it comes to now a pharmacological agent, which cannabis is, it is pharmacologically active for good or for bad, you can use it in whatever way. Well, medical staff should sound alarm bells to you that they would rather hide something, which now is not illegal in most places, and in a lot of leagues that's not illegal. But the fact that they would rather hide it from you and figure it out themselves, one, because they don't necessarily trust you, but two, because you have no education on it and you have no answers to the questions. And that was the biggest thing that came out, was like, and the medical staff know it. They say, well, I feel like I have no place to talk about this when an athlete even brings it up because I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was pretty interesting, but it's hopefully someone will publish it. I'm really hoping, but it's so long because it looked at so many different angles. I don't know. We'll see. I'll keep you posted because it's in review right now and they might just be like, oh, hell no, this is way too long.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, someone would be really amazing to publish it because it's really yeah, all encompassing. I think that one of the interesting things when we talk about athletes and that like athlete provider perspective it's similar to how patient populations are talking with their medical providers as well, where there was a study done like 2017, I think, and so it's been a while, but like it was basically showing that medical providers are getting most of their information from their patients and
Yep.
not from like medical journals and not from conferences or anything like that. They're getting it from their patients. So they're like people are figuring out how to use cannabis on their own. And then the doctors are figuring it out from the patients. And it should be the other way around. Yeah, and so I think that that's a really interesting dynamic where there's like this really interesting power shift of who knows information, who has who has the power in that situation.
Yeah, and it's totally backwards from anything that we've ever really seen, right? And like, the medical, so when I worked in clinical physiology, when I worked in a doctor's group, you can see a shift happening right at that time. It was when all of the quantified self technology was coming in, like, Fitbit and like all these different things that you could, the Apple watches, the heart rate monitor, so everything. So now people could start to monitor health metrics on their own. And doctors were not used to that because they were used to the patriarchal, like, I will tell you what your body is. I will tell you what is wrong with you. And all of a sudden, there was consumer level quantified self technology coming out. And people are like, no, I'm going to tell you, look, my blood pressure is this, my heart rate is this, I slept this many, you could even get, well, 23andMe came out, they could get genetic information about themselves, like they could get micronutrient panels. So now all of a sudden, this consumer level thing, they didn't need the doctors anymore. They could literally get the information for themselves. And I think the doctors were kind of reeling because they were losing a grip on what they were used to being in control. And there was a huge shift right around 2012, 2013, 2014 when all of those devices came in. And I think cannabis actually is one place that is almost like, okay, this is the end of the rope because people are like, well, I'm telling you that this is what I use. This is how I use it. I am doing this. And the doctors are like, because they're used to being the ones to be like, well, I'll prescribe you this. You take it like this. And that is not how cannabis works at all. So I think there's been a big shift. And the doctors, to your point, they like in my dissertation, I had to look at the medical setup in general. And it's about 9% of medical establishments that have any curriculum. So medical schools, 9% teach anything to do with cannabis or the endocannabinoid system. And it's generally about 1 hour. And all they talk about is harms. They don't talk about anything other than that. And so in Canada, like, and again, like there was another survey in Canada because we're federally legal. So remember, like there's cannabis kind of everywhere, right? In Canada, it's not a thing really anymore. It's whatever. But so a survey was done on doctors in Canada to ask them, well, how often do patients even ask you about cannabis? Like, have you ever had a patient ask you about that? 97% of doctors in Canada have had a patient, at least one patient, ask them about cannabis for some therapeutic purposes. That is almost 100% of doctors that have been asked. But, there's still no push on them to be educated. But honestly, I don't know. In Canada also, like our healthcare system is overloaded there anyways, but I don't know if doctors are the right people. I don't know if they have enough time to give to it, and I don't know that they want to. So I'm not sure that they're the right healthcare professionals to really take it on as their own thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I've told people this before, but when I mean I have three graduate degrees, and I think that there was maybe like one case study at one point in physical therapy school where someone was like, consuming cannabis after an injury or after a surgery, and like, what kind of advice would you give them? And it's like, well, smoking is bad for you. Like it gets in the way of healing, and um, and yeah, it's just it never ever came up in
Yeah.
my like eight years of graduate school, 4 years of undergrad. So like
Yep.
12 years of higher education, I never heard it
Me
ever.
neither. Me
And
neither.
And then,
And
and it kind of makes sense too, because at the time there wasn't really any research on it, and any of the research that was done was looking at the harms. And there was like a little bit of research, like, when I started going into the research, I found that there was a little pocket of research happening in the late 60s, early 70s about cannabis and physiological factors, and then just drop off.
yeah,
Nothing for like 20 years.
yeah,
And it was like 2003, I think, the Sparling and I forget the other author's name, where they found that cycling increased the anandamide in the bloodstream. And so it was like that it's that endocannabinoid system related to exercise. That first happened right after I graduated college. And so like it was still so like new to even hear a different perspective about cannabis and human bodies.
yeah. And I think too, like, um, because like cannabis is one thing, the plant and using those molecules, but the endocannabinoid system is something completely separate, even without the plant, right? And so I think that and both of us have graduate degrees in physiology, right? And it's like never heard about it. I was so mad after I was like, wait, what? There's this whole system. But when you look at what happened there, because I'm like, how is this possible that you could, like you said, you get through all these degrees, and it's like, how have I never heard of this before? But I think that it's because it's so new. Like we didn't even know how cannabis was working for so many years. Like in 64, Meshulam isolated THC, like so realized what it was that was making people high, but did not know how it was doing it. Like they thought that it was just like, generally diffusing through cells and kind of doing stuff to the membrane. They didn't think that it actually had pharmacological activity at specific receptors until like 1988, Howlett isolated the CB1 receptor. 1988, like that's not even that long ago. So if you think about how young this science is in years, then that makes me feel like a little bit better. Like they weren't trying to hide something from us, but it's like, you know, but now there's been such an explosion molecularly to understand the endocannabinoid system. And so then you can sort of bring in the cannabis plant and see how you can use those molecules to affect the endocannabinoid system. But as exercise physiologists, you and I, it makes perfect sense because we understand molecularly how exercise can affect your body and how you can affect your physiology by exercise and by diet and by all these other things. Well, those are all by way of the endocannabinoid system. So then when you look at the cannabis plants, it's like, well, yeah, no kidding. Like, yeah, it's all you're doing is you're just finding a different way to, change the anandamide, change 2-AG, change the receptor levels. But you can do that, by exercise, cold plunges, singing, acupuncture. Those have all the things that people typically would say, oh, that's woo woo, have now been completely proven out in science. And all of them are running through the endocannabinoid system. Like acupuncture increases your endocannabinoids in the place and it increases the receptors exactly where you're sticking the needle. That makes sense because your endocannabinoid secretion is your natural reduction of inflammation. So it makes perfect sense in acupuncture. If you're sticking needles in here, you're squirting anandamide and 2-AG in that place, and that's going to hit the receptors and it's going to take down the inflammation. It's not woo-woo, it's literal science. It's just we didn't have ways, we didn't even know what receptors was working through until 1988. We had no idea what to even look for. We didn't have ways. Now we do. Now we have ways to flag the molecules with little, we can flag them with light and we can see where they're going now. We didn't have the ability to do that before, but we do now. So pretty much everything that everyone thought was woo-woo is totally not. And it's the endocannabinoid system. And cannabis is just one thing that we can use to affect that. But anybody that studied exercise, like you already know your endocannabinoid system. You just don't know that you know it, but you know it. If you understand exercise, you understand the endocannabinoid system. You just have to look at it through this lens.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness. And so yeah, we are going to go on a journey together to talk about the endocannabinoid system. We'll do like probably like a whole series about just the endocannabinoid system. And then yeah, like looking at all these other different dynamics related to cannabis as well. And so I'm really excited to go on this journey with you. Is there anything else that we should let people know in our like first kind of get together with each other?
I don't know. I can't. Well, I just know that we're winging it. This is not going to be perfect. We are just going for it because I think we're both just sort of tired of hearing a lot of things that aren't backed in science or like people, for a long time, cannabis information was censored and that was a problem. And now it's becoming less censored and that's also a problem because now you have people saying things that are completely incorrect. And nobody knows everything. And the endocannabinoid system in cannabis science, I mean, it's a joke because it's always more research needed right after every single thing. So, like, yeah, more research needed, but we do have some research, and it's just to sort of look at it in the context of what we know, or even just having some thoughts out loud. Sometimes I think out loud and it's not based in science, it's just me thinking out loud. So,
Yeah, and I think that's valid because we have an educated perspective on it as well. And so I think that you and I can really help people kind of filter through what's good and what's bad out there in terms of the discourse as
yeah.
well.
And hopefully it can help keep people safer and also to help people make a more informed decision about when they're going to choose to use products because I work with athletes. They are choosing to use products because they want to for many different reasons. And so just to help them know like what is out there now. And by having these conversations, people can see sort of the reality of a very confusing space. And I think sometimes it's confusing on purpose. I think there's people that want people to remain confused because that's how they make a lot of money or that's how they steer things their way. But, I think that everybody is entitled to make an informed decision when they want to. And I think because we have the education, I don't think it should cost people, they shouldn't have to do a degree to understand this. Like I hope to teach people and it shouldn't cost them money. So maybe if they listen to us for free, they'll learn something maybe.
Yes, exactly. And as you were just talking, I was like, oh my gosh, there we could do like a whole thing about the restrictions in research, like the reasons why
Oh,
it's still so confusing. And
yes.
then the marketing side of it too, like how it's been marketed in such like insane ways that I just know that there's no research behind some of the things I see at a dispensary. And it's like,
I
what do
know.
it's just wild. And so I'm really excited to like see all the different ways that we'll be able to navigate this confusing landscape and help clear the path and make it less confusing for people.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm hoping for too. So this will
Yay.
be fun.
I know I'm excited. All right, perfect. All right, well, stay tuned. We'll have more episodes coming out soon.
Yep, perfect.